I didn't know. It was the 50th anniversary of the race riot, 1971. The race riot was in 1921 in Tulsa, in the Greenwood area, and I knew nothing about it until a magazine article came out in June of 1971. I asked my grandmother if she was living in Tulsa at that time, and she said she didn't want to talk about it. And I kept pressing her, and finally she said, the white woman I worked for vouched for me, that's all I'm going to say. And she wouldn't say anything else. And so when she said that, that let me know that she had been interned after the race riot, which is what they did to the blacks who still remained in the community after it was over. And they had to have a reputable white person vouch for them to get them out.
So by interned, you mean they put them in internment, they were effectively prisoners?
Yes. They built a fence around the baseball park, I think it was at that time, and they interned people in behind those fences and in the Brady Theater, what is now the Brady Theater.
So what was the spark, if you will, that started the race riot? Like, what was the last straw?
There's always the legend of, you know, the young black man who touched or assaulted a white girl. The story was that a young black man tried to assault a white girl in an elevator. But every race riot, they were really massacres, that happened in the country after World War I, started with that same story, that some young black man had assaulted or insulted a white girl, and so that's what sparked it. But we know that that's not the reason.
So in Tulsa, in this specific instance, what was the damage, what was the story, what were the high points, I suppose the most interesting points about the race riot? What caused, what made it a headliner?
Because the entire black community was destroyed, and it was like a war zone.
And this is white on black violence?
Mm-hmm. And whites moved into the area, shooting, killing blacks, and there was a few whites killed self-defense, but mainly they estimate there were approximately 300 black people who were killed during the race riot.
And this is during 1921, mm-hmm, so?
Mm-hmm. It was May 31st and June 1st.
Do you know like what percentage of the population that was?
300
no, people? Was it
not right off my head, but it was.
Because this is before Tulsa cleaned up the river, and they were still using it. Were they using it for transport at the time? Like, was Tulsa a booming city at this point?
Now Greenwood was booming.
This is the black part of Tulsa.
Exactly.
Greenwood.
It was called the Black Wall Street.
Okay.
And a lot of that had to do with segregation, because blacks were working in South Tulsa, the white part of town, but they couldn't spend their money there, so they had their own, community. Okay. So all of the money was staying in the black community. Mm-hmm. So there was some black wealth at that time, and that was really the real reason behind the riot, was to run the blacks out of town and to take what they had.
Do you think jealousy was a big motive?
Oh yeah, it was a huge one. And Tulsa at that time was run by the Ku Klux Klan. So they were in the police department, they were in the city government. So that was, it was a huge thing that happened. So after they went through and ran everybody out and killed people, then they went in and looted the homes. And then they burned them. They set fire to them.
Wow. Now, is this over the course of a day or, mm-hmm, a week, or
over one day?
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then once all of the damage had been done to the people in the buildings, government officials came back through and rounded up any surviving black people and put them in the internment camps.
Any that didn't leave, because there were people, I heard stories of people in horse wagons going north, as far as what's now Collinsville. Mm-hmm. Some people left Oklahoma and never returned. Wow. There are families that live all over the country whose ancestors left Tulsa as a result of the race riot.
So how did, you said that your grandmother worked for a white woman who vouched for her, and that's how she got out. Mm-hmm. Was there like a grand release of the people who didn't have someone vouching for them? What became of those?
And I don't know. I know that eventually happened, but I don't know the details of that.
Okay.
I do know that after the riot, the city created zoning laws to try to keep black people from rebuilding.
So Greenwood was never rebuilt?
It was, but
Okay.
because the people who have heard of John Hope Franklin, his father, D.C. Franklin, was an attorney who fought the city on that, and so the community was rebuilt.
Both Franklins were black, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so they were fighting to get the right to rebuild
Right.
there. Okay. Did they
John
win?
Hope Franklin was a child at the time, but he became a
Okay.
famous historian.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And so, but B.C. Franklin, his father, was the attorney who fought the city and fought the insurance companies who didn't want to pay the families as a result of their losses. And so Greenwood was rebuilt.
Mhm.
When I grew up there in the 50s and 60s, it was a totally rebuilt community. It was not wealthy any longer, but we had, churches and schools and stores and movie theaters and skating rinks and barbershops. I mean, it was homes. It was all rebuilt. And then urban renewal came through in the 70s and wiped it out again.
Wow. So, talking about Tulsa now, and so we've seen the segregated communities and then the whites wiping out the black community.
Mhm.
And then the black community was rebuilt and we still have segregation, but they seem to be fairly happy in both communities. And then what did you say it was?
Urban renewal.
Urban renewal wiped that community out again. So
Mhm.
what is the state of the black community in Tulsa now?
But there were several things that happened. As blacks were moved further north, basically, they were pushed further north. And then as they moved further north, whites moved out. And so other communities were created as a result.
And that's
so-
the urban sprawl we see now in
Mhm.
Jinx and Topolpa.
Jinx and Owasso and Broken Arrow.
Okay. So we were talking earlier about how I was never taught about the race riots in school, and your mother and grandmother wouldn't talk about it because it was such a PTSD.
I don't even know if my mother knew anything
Wow.
about it.
So what is being done now to preserve that history? How can we access this information and make it widely known?
There are websites now. There was the Race Riot Commission, and I can't remember the exact year. It was like 2001, maybe. The Race Riot Commission was formed, and there was research done, and there's a whole publication from the state. There was a lawsuit that was brought in behalf of the race riot survivors that was taken all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court refused to hear it. They said the statute of limitations had run.
Oh, no.
And yet we see restitution being paid to the Japanese who were interned during World War II. We see now there's restitution being paid to Native American tribes, but the restitution was never provided for race riot survivors.
And is that exclusive to Tulsa, or is that
I don't
widespread?
know about other areas. There were race riots in other cities, St. Louis, Kansas City. They were all in other places in the country that were around that time period.
But it sounds like it's pretty safe to say that Oklahoma is further behind in
Yeah.
restitution and reparation as far as segregation is concerned.
The loss of life in the Tulsa race riot was greater than any other.
Wow. Well, thanks for telling us about that. This is an important course of history that I'm glad I know about now. Thank you.
You're welcome.